Hey, Jeannie, who's our guest on the show today?
Today we have Matthew Metz and Rob Sargent, and we're talking about Coltura.
Oh, cool.
Hi.
Hey, welcome to the Energy Nerd Show.
Hi. Honored.
We could say welcome back, at least to Matthew, because we got the lowdown a while back. A
Yeah,
refresher would be good, though. Can you tell us what a super user is?
So a super user is a person in the top 10% for their gasoline consumption. So typically that's a person who uses more than 1,200 gallons a year and up. America uses 35% of the world's gasoline, and that's way more than any other country. China uses about 12%, and the EU roughly 7%. But the super users, just 21 million Americans use almost 11% of the world's gasoline. And so almost as much as China. So 21 million Americans are using as much as like 1.4 billion Chinese. So our consumption is off the charts, and in particular, those of the super users.
So averaging 1,200 gallons per year, do you know the range? Like what?
No, that's the floor for a
That's
super
the floor.
user.
Yeah, the average is about 1,800 gallons. And
Okay.
the sky's the limit. So some people are using more than 5,000 or 6,000 a year, like 500 gallons a month.
Can you speak at all to the economics to a user then, to one of these super users, and in terms of their energy burden?
Yeah. So if you're using 2,000 gallons a year and gasoline costs $4 a gallon, that's $8,000 a year. So this, if someone's making $40,000 a year and they're spending $8,000 on gas, well, that's 20%. So that's a lot of money. It's a huge percentage of their income.
So how much would they save just on the energy portion if they switch just from gas to charging an electric car?
Yeah, so it depends a lot on the region and on the electric prices in the area and on the gas prices, but very roughly, nationally, it's about 40%, I believe, the cost of electricity. So if someone was spending 8,000 a year, it would go down to 3,500, 3,000 a year, something like that. So, very considerable savings. Make a huge difference for a family that's, is spending such a huge percentage of their income on gasoline.
Some of us live in Massachusetts, right? And even in a state like Massachusetts with relatively low gas prices and relatively, quite high electricity prices, it makes sense. And then, then there's a spectrum, Washington State, where Matthew's from, they have very high gas prices and very low electricity prices. And so the opportunities to save money are huge. But no matter where you are, especially in the universe of super users, you're going to save a lot of money. That's even before you get into the dirty little secret about EVs is that the maintenance costs are so low. You don't have transmissions or exhaust systems or all the other things that end up costing $1,500 when you go in for the free oil change.
Okay, so Jeannie and Bruce, since we last talked, a lot's been happening. We now have the ability to calculate gasoline consumption basically for all the consumers in America. It's anonymized data, but now we know exactly where gasoline is being used. And that's a first, that's a real breakthrough. And we have it for the entire country. And also have figured out now, working with these GPS data sets, how people are actually doing it. Like, okay, they're going to work, they're going to school, how their activities are structured, how their driving habit are causing their use of gasoline. So it's been really interesting. And we just had a big article published in the New York Times about our work that actually was reflected in our report. It's called Cracking the Gasoline Code. So anyway, that's been the really exciting things that have been happening.
Are you tracking EVs also, or is it just the gasoline?
Yes, we are tracking EVs. I will say though that EV data is very hard to come by. It's pretty obscure and very incomplete. Only some states have it. So that's a tougher nut to crack, frankly.
So what are you doing with the gasoline data? Tell us about your latest analysis.
What we're doing is basically finding opportunity. The super user represents a person for whom, in most cases, it makes sense for them to switch to an EV. Often just getting rid of their used car, whatever it is, and buying a new EV will actually be less expensive, even including the payment on the new EV. In many states, in many situations, there's a lot of savings there. And so with that knowledge, there's just, great opportunity, both economic, political, et cetera, to make it happen because, it's not that heavy a lift. In fact, in some ways, it's downhill. It's just you got to kind of clear out the friction that will enable it to start rolling.
This is all rooted in, a real concern that we aren't meeting our greenhouse gas emissions and reducing gasoline consumption as much as we need to meet our climate objectives. And then the other piece of it is just, every state and people know how much gasoline is used because they tax it, but very few people know who's using it, where they're using it, how they're using it, and how that might inform the programs that they are setting up to either advance EVs or to reduce emissions more broadly from the transportation sector. So what we've been spending the last year and a half or 2 years, I guess, doing is getting people to wrap their minds around that concept that all things being equal, we should be steering investments in EV deployment toward the end of, wherever possible, getting the people that use the most gasoline to switch. Right now, what we're mostly seeing is the people that can afford EVs the most and are driving the least are the ones that are switching, and we need to flip that. And there's all sorts of reasons. The biggest reason for us is the environmental outcomes. But as it turns out, it ends up being a lot of sort of cultural barriers to EVs that we think this data can help inform people's efforts to overcome them. So we've been working with state agencies in a variety of states, in some cases utilities, or at least one utility right now, to get them to think through, like, if we have an EV incentive, what's the best way to spend that? In California, there's a coalition we're working with that's a bunch of clean air folks and an EJ group that is interested in taking their vehicle replacement program, the Clean Cars for All program, and making gasoline consumption one of the criteria, along with income and disadvantage designations and other things. In Maryland, we're working on a bill that would steer outreach on their incentive program to super users. In Washington State, it's right smack in the transportation electrification plan that they would do that. And then in Vermont, there's a utility that sought and got legislative approval to incorporate the concept there. But really, it's just the beginning. And the other really cool thing was in Michigan, Governor Whitmer announced a fleet electrification program. And one of the things that we thought was the coolest about it was that it was actually acknowledging that both the Michigan taxpayers and the Michigan environment would be better off if they focused on getting the vehicles that use the most gasoline to switch first. So we're beginning to get some traction on the idea, and hopefully it'll keep happening.
So, like, my EV that I got 8 years ago, and is used to commute 2 miles to work and 2 miles home, is kind of a ridiculous waste of an EV in a way. Like, we should be switching over cars of people who drive more than that in order to really save for greenhouse gas emissions and make the best use of the investments.
Exactly. I mean, I think if you bought it 8 years ago, you were probably at least participating in helping to scale the industry by being a relatively early adopter. But we're sort of beyond that now. And especially with the current federal incentives, state incentives and utility incentives should really be focused on sort of steering rather than rowing around EV deployment and steering towards whatever that state or utility's objectives are. For utilities, it would be selling more electricity. And for states, it might be equity objectives. Certainly, we hope it would be climate objectives, emission objectives. So
we never want to discourage anyone from getting an EV. It's a good thing. And basically, and in your case, you have polluted less. You've create less carbon pollution as a result of having that EV. That being said, it doesn't mean that the government, should focus its subsidies on you, and it should go elsewhere. So.
You mentioned a handful of states that are taking this approach, or figuring in usage into the policy design, and we should link to some of those examples in the notes of the show. But do you have sort of an idea, like, what would you like to see? Do you have like what's your ideal policy, or do you have kind of or is it too early for that? And it's more just to get usage figured in and address super users kind of first as a priority, or do you have like samples of like what the policy really specifics ought to look like?
I don't think we have complete boilerplate samples. I think with incentives, it would be focusing outreach, at a minimum, focusing outreach on the so-called super users. And then where relevant or possible, to try to adjust the incentives to at least get people's attention. And then with utilities, I think it's the same thing. Like, a utility has a stake in getting somebody that uses 700 gallons a week to switch to electricity. And so they actually have a business case to be made. So we're hoping that they'll do more than just sort of estimate the current trajectory of EVs and sort of build their infrastructure based on that, but actually play a role in actually changing that behavior, which is one of the things that's challenge. They've got a lot of challenges there, but
there needs to be kind of a different emphasis in how we run environmental campaigns. And so, okay, promote EVs and sell EVs. That's good. But actually, the final analysis is how much gasoline that we're burning and how much carbon we're emitting, and really kind of like put the metrics on that and the focus on that. And the EV is a tool rather than an endpoint for policy. And so that's what we want to do. And there's different ways of doing it. But, the simplest way that we presented in our first report was you pay, let's say, a fixed fee to a person for their annual gallons of gasoline used. And so if someone uses 1,000 gallons a year, they would get $10 per gallon to switch to an EV. So that would be $10,000. If someone uses 2,000 gallons, they'd get $20,000 to switch to an EV, a huge incentive that would really make it easy. And, and then just really tie the gasoline savings to the incentive very directly. Super users are using a third of all gasoline. So if the IPCC has said we're supposed to cut all sources of emissions 50% by 2030, and so a 50% cut in gasoline would mean basically all the super users have to convert over 50% of the rest of the people. I mean, it's very important that super users convert, but also, other people in the middle area who by international standards are still using a lot of gasoline. We need to convert broad sectors, but particularly, the super users to have any chance of meeting that 50% by 2030 goal.
We're not anywhere near on track. I mean, the EIA projections of gasoline consumption are, at best like 15% by 20.
Yeah, I think less than 15.
30, Matthew?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and, as we know, gasoline in, carbon out, right? It is not, like the only way you can reduce emissions from the transportation sector is to not burn gasoline.
Yeah, one thing I also like to mention is, some people are saying, in the EV policy space, we're done because, we passed this ACC2 regulation that's going to require 100% EVs by 2035. So really now it's time to move on to other issues. And we vehemently disagree with that because, gasoline is such a huge part of our overall carbon use. It's about 17%. And even with these new regulations, it's still not going to go down nearly enough. It's not even on track to go down 50% by 2035. And so we actually need to keep the pressure on. We need to really push this gasoline to EV transition as fast as we can. And we're definitely not done on the policy side.
Yeah, a lot of those targets are market share for new EVs.
Yeah, exactly. People confuse that. Oh, well, it says 100% by 2035, but that's only that's only the new EVs. Only 6% of cars turn over in a year, and so it takes 15 years to turn them all over. So we're still going to have gas cars on the road by 2040. And if present trends continue, if those people were super users, we still could be well over 50% of our present gasoline use in the 2040s if the super users are slow to convert.
So I understand you made a map. I'm wondering, where are these super users? Is that what it's going to tell us?
Yeah, so this is a map of the United States, of course. And so the light colors, those are states that have less than 10% super users. So they tend to be more urban states or larger urban populations. And you see in the middle of the country, it's darker so that they have a higher than average level of super users. And then in the red states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Mississippi, actually surprisingly,
New Hampshire.
Yeah, and New Hampshire is right up there. And anyway, they have some of the highest levels per capita of super users. But then what you can do is you can zoom in and you say, okay, so this is now we're going at the county level. We can, let's say, zoom in on the DC metro area. And again, so the urban areas are light. And then as you get darker purple out to the rural areas, that's where there's very high concentrations of super users. And you can take it in even further down to the census tract level. And so there's that you can start to see pockets of like high gasoline use within a city or within a metro area. And so, maybe those areas you would focus for, trying to sell EVs and selling, you guys are spending tons of money on gasoline in your area.
Have you done an analysis of where the EVs and charging stations and pro EV policies are being passed? Because my guess is it's sort of anti-correlated. That this is sort of the converse. It's not that it's random. It's actually probably the opposite of the super users.
Yeah. So that map is basically a county map of, I think, roughly 12 states, I think. of EVs. And so the bluer it is, the more EVs. And just as you say, that doesn't really match up that well with the map of the super users.
And you will see a correlation on EV deployment. You'll definitely see. I mean, we haven't thought through like New Hampshire versus Vermont, but I'm guessing the big difference between New Hampshire and Vermont is policy, because they're very similar states. And I think the demographics would be simple. And if anything, New Hampshire has more sort of bigger cities. So, I mean, not big cities, but it's all relative. But and so, and Vermont has good EV policies, both incentives, plus it's adopted ACC2. So the manufacturers are going to be like wanting to get cleaner cars into that state. So there is a correlation. And then, you're able to then also look at the demographics, the gasoline burden of individuals. And that's one of the things that I think is the most exciting for us is the opportunities to identify people who have been dismissed as prospects for EVs, right? So rural drivers, and then equally exciting EJ groups that are realizing that there's many parts of the country where there are low-income people who don't and will not anytime soon have a mobility option that isn't driving. So that creates all sorts of opportunities to identify new allies, only if we use this data to identify the people who would most benefit and take action.
And even if the all-in cost of the EV option for a super user is lower, there's a upfront capital cost kind of thing that creates a hurdle that policy can address.
Exactly. And the federal incentive goes a long way to getting people's attention. Then the state incentives can help too, in addition to then thinking through charging infrastructure and other things. But there's a whole lot of what we would characterize as gasoline burdened people that live in single family homes that could benefit from an EV as long as if they drive a lot, but say less than 150 miles a day, could just charge at home. And it would be worth it for the utility to put that charger in because they're going to increase their revenue by getting a super user to switch to electricity.
There's a lot of kind of state policy and utility service territory implications. I'm wondering at a national level, does our Secretary of Transportation know about this analysis, and what does he think?
Well, he will after he watches the Energy Nerd Show.
Exactly.
We have had conversations with Gabe Klein and the folks at the transportation, but it was a while ago, and in the meantime, they have been very, very busy rolling out many, many programs, and so we're hoping to get it back on the federal radar screen. And there's a number of things. RMI, for example, just did a fact sheet or a little white paper with some suggestions for what people could incorporate in their carbon pollution reduction grant, as an option to have a super user pilot or something be part of that grant as a sort of planning exercise. So we're getting there, but it's, people are distracted in Washington with all sorts of things.
Sure. But when one is rolling out a bunch of programs, that's a good time to include good new ideas.
Yes. No. And so we're working hard to do that. But, I do think that most good federal ideas end up being rooted in something more local and state. And so we're taking a crack at that first, but certainly welcome anybody that's listening. Love to work with you on how to get this thing more focused at the federal level. So
I wanted to also just mention something kind of exciting that's happening in Texas is that there's a company there called Octopus EV. And what they do is that they lease used EVs, like very recent, but used EVs at very competitive prices. And they're trying to do it to super users. And they also provide free energy because they're also kind of like an energy provider in Houston area. We're starting to hear elsewhere in the country, the private initiatives to really contact these biggest users of gasoline and start to take away some of that money that's being spent on gasoline and put it towards EVs and clean energy. Super exciting.
That's really exciting. And I was thinking about a Texas question because I'm from Texas, and Austin has gotten so expensive in terms of housing, like a lot of places, but Austin is off the charts. And people are now living, an hour and a half outside of Austin and still sometimes, maybe daily going to work. So the private initiatives might be successful if there's a way of even working through employers, because, state government is not going to take this up there. The city is pretty progressive, but I don't know what their leverage is. Do you have any thoughts on more private enterprise taking this up?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there, and like these guys, this Octopus EV, they're seeing it. Yeah, I mean, they can definitely make a lot of money if they can get super users to convert. And so, how they structure it and what kind of partnerships they need, it's going to vary. But I think there's big opportunities. In general, I think there's an opportunity right now is for kind of shared partnerships to basically take away gasoline revenue stream and give it to other people. And because the dollars are so substantial, like $4,000 or $5,000 a year, like big cash flows, and there can be kind of new and innovative partnerships between consumers and utilities and EV lessors or finance companies to capture that value and share it.
Cool.
The Texas advocates are, I think, increasingly interested in this. I just was on a call with the Textra folks, the Texas EV advocacy group, and they're sort of spinning their mental wheels on ways in which we could use this to move the needle in a state that has a lot of gasoline burdened people. And as Jeannie said, it's sort of a poster child for the growth of the exurbs, right? Rural and exurbs are where most of the people are. So
Texas has a lot of renewable energy. I mean, you guys got huge amounts of wind energy that's like dirt cheap, and at night, that people can basically fuel their cars for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Smitty on the Nerd Show, but he was talking about the power outages and the ice storms, not EVs. But we should have him back, because it'd be interesting to see what he's thinking now about the transportation. Is there anything else you want to talk about while we're here?
Well, I guess I'd like to invite people to check out our report, Cracking the Gasoline Code. You can get it from Coltura's website, cultura.org, and check out our map. And we have the map up for people to see, and a lot of data insight. So it's pretty state of the art.
Yeah, it seems like a great data set. Our analysis at Sinus, we do analysis of like EV adoption and climate plans and energy, but we definitely tend to count cars, right, and have targets. What percentage of the market share has in terms of number of vehicles, right, and so thinking more about vehicle miles traveled and about offsetting gasoline. I think is really a great idea.
It really is kind of amazing how much. I mean, for a long time, with all of these things, whether it's solar or EVs or any of these technologies, you have the early adoption was just really important no matter what. But now we're at the point where we really need to be smart about how to maximize both environmental and economic benefits. And then the beauty, in our view, is that there's a huge chunk of these folks who are extremely burdened by the cost of gasoline. And gasoline gets kind of a pass on the whole energy burden discussion because people don't pay gasoline bill, monthly gasoline bills. They just do their whatever, fill the tank, and they look, if they look back, they'll say, oh my God, I spent more on gasoline than anything else. And that is an energy burden that we really need to help people overcome.
That's great. It's tying a bunch of different interest groups and interests together, which is always, well, in this case, seems like a really great thing. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, guys.
Matthew again, Rob, maybe the first time. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.